Hello, welcome to 6.01. It's a Small World 1. This is starting with slide 14. Global interdependence. Without international trade, each country of the world would be economically independent and would have to produce all the basic goods needed by its population. Since national markets tend to be small, competition without international trade would be limited to a small number of domestic producers. Product diversity would be low. Because of weak competition, markets would tend to encourage oligopolies and monopolies, making prices higher. Thanks to international trade, countries reap numerous economic benefits. Trade allows countries to specialize in the production of certain goods and import the others. International trade increases competition and encourages the redistribution and concentration of production as comparative advantages are exploited and greater economies of scale are achieved, resulting in lower prices. What this does is create a situation of economic interdependence in which countries rely on other countries for certain kinds of goods and services. The benefits of interdependence. Like nearly everything else in economics, interdependence has both positive and negative effects. On the positive side, interdependence can promote economic growth and increase the global standard of living. International trade allows countries to provide all the goods and services needed by their populations, making it impossible to maintain a high standard of living. With global trade, an enormous variety of products is more widely accessible, and prices tend to be lower. When consumers can buy more goods and services with the wages they earn, standards of living can rise. The downside of interdependence. On the negative side, interdependence involves a loss of independence. Each country in an interdependent global economy gives up some control over its own destiny. For example, if the minimum wage is raised in Taiwan, where many shoes sold in the United States are made, Taiwanese workers would make more money, but shoe prices in the United States would increase. An action by the Taiwanese government, over which U.S. consumers have no control, affects the purchasing power and economic decisions made by consumers in the United States and around the world. Because of interdependence, consumers in one country are dependent on laws in other countries for prices and product availability in their own. Interdependence also brings mutual vulnerability. While U.S. consumers are vulnerable to changes in labor laws in Taiwan, the workers in Taiwan are vulnerable to the response of consumers and producers elsewhere. For example, if shoe prices went too high as a result of the increased minimum wage in Taiwan, demand could drop off, driving producers to move their shoe factories out of Taiwan and into a country where labor costs are lower. That would put Taiwanese workers out of work. The economic specialty. In theory, specialization in international trade based on comparative advantage can raise the productivity of labor, increase economic growth, and improve living standards around the world. As a result of international trade, markets contain more goods, greater variety, and more competition, lowering prices overall and increasing the purchasing power of consumers. Specialization also creates interdependence, which makes markets reliant on one another. Interdependence potentially yields great benefits, but it also makes countries more vulnerable to outside influences. In response, governments may enact protective measures to reduce vulnerability and to keep prices and wages stable, but these protectionist policies limit free trade and curtail the potential benefits of specialization. Specialization review. Test your knowledge of specialization and interdependence. Type an answer into each of the boxes to finish the sentences correctly. You have learned that engaging in production and trade based on comparative advantage is supposed to improve efficiency, create wealth, and raise the standard of living around the world. But is that happening in reality? To find out, it helps to step back and look at the actual patterns of global trade, both past and present. International trade is an ever-evolving process that affects each country and region differently. While some of the potential benefits of specialization and international trade have been realized, a considerable gap between the economic promises and the economic realities of globalization remain. Early global trade patterns. Globalization goes back to the earliest civilizations. In 4th century BC, Alexander the Great forged a mighty emperor that facilitated trade between Asia and Europe. Later, Roman traders exchanged goods from distant India and China. In the 13th century, Marco Polo returned to Italy from China with many goods desired by Europeans, including silk and jewels. In the 15th century, European explorers first reached Asia by sea. At that time, China had the most advanced economy in the world, with established trading relations with India, East Africa, Arabia, and other nearby regions. The European traders didn't have much that was in demand in Asian markets except silver. Thus, in the early pattern of global trade, there was a flow of capital, silver, into Asia and luxury goods into Europe. This pattern held until the 19th century, when European countries took direct control of Asian markets through colonization. India became a colony of Britain, and Southeast Asia was colonized by the Netherlands, Britain, France, Spain, and later the US. China, Japan, and Korea were forced to sign unequal treaties that gave Western powers important trade advantages. Colonial rule, or colonialism, spread into Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere. Countries found themselves suddenly in a situation of forced domination and economic reversal. Colonialism reversed the pattern of international trade. Colonizers used the raw materials and labor of the colonies to benefit their domestic economies. Colonies got little in return other than exploitation and misery. For example, in addition to its many negative economic implications, colonization also created racism and ethnic division within and among countries. The results are still apparent today. The effects of colonization. Western colonial powers established high tariffs and other trade barriers to make sure that their colonies traded only with the home country. This allowed the colonizers to extract resources to fund and fuel industrial development, which led to increased wealth. Gold, silver, minerals, gems, fur, cotton, and sugar were some of the many commodities extracted from the colonies. This trade pattern dominated until the two devastating world wars of the 20th century shattered the economies of the West. Most former colonies gained independence. With the end of colonial rule, new countries were free to take part in international trade on their own terms, rather than on the terms set by Western colonizers. The colonial trading pattern had monumental and lasting effects. The independence of the colonies didn't automatically bring equality in the new global economy. Industrialization had flourished in developed countries. Meanwhile, the colonies, having served mainly as pools of raw material and labor, emerged from colonial domination much poorer and with much less economic development than their former colonial masters. Once independent, the former colonies had little of the industry or infrastructure necessary to compete in the global marketplace. National economies were vulnerable to price swings in the post-colonial era, and they could not plan for an effective economy. Today's global trade patterns reflect and are strongly affected by the colonial period. The big patterns of global trade today demonstrate the lingering effects of old trade patterns. The explosion of the global economy. Colonialism not only created major inequalities among the different countries of the world, but it may also have stifled global economic development. The privileged access, trade restrictions, and one-way flow of wealth that took place stunted economic growth by restricting free trade and undercutting the advantages that flow from such trade. Since the end of colonialism, there has been a massive expansion in the global economy. Steady growth has been the rule for the past 50 years, though that growth has not necessarily been evenly distributed around the world. Your take on colonialism. The effects of colonialism were being debated in economic circles even before the practice ended. What exactly are the effects of colonialism? How has it impacted individual countries and the world at large? Take a moment to consider your own opinion about colonialism. This is going to be the end of the recording. We're going to end with slide 23 and we will pick up with slide 24. Please let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. Have a great day.